While waiting in line at the supermarket, a wealthy woman mocked an elderly lady, unaware that this seemingly unassuming woman was a powerful judge who would shape her fate the very next day. Claire, radiating wealth and beauty, felt out of place in the neighborhood grocery store. Anxiety twisted in her chest, a relentless drumbeat echoing through her ribcage. The checkout line crawled at a painfully slow pace, testing her already frayed patience. In front of her stood an elderly woman with a kind face, fumbling with her bank card. The clerk gently informed her, "Ma'am, your card isn't working," as he attempted to swipe it again. The old woman's wrinkled features betrayed a mix of confusion and rising panic. Claire's irritation boiled over. She huffed, tapping her designer shoe against the floor in a clear display of frustration. "Can you please hurry up?" she snapped, her tone dripping with annoyance. The elderly woman turned, her brows furrowing in surprise. "I'm sorry, dear, I'm doing my best," she replied, her voice quivering slightly. Claire scoffed, her eyes flashing with impatience. "Your best isn't good enough," she shot back, her words icy and harsh. Without waiting for a reply, she pushed past the elderly woman, disregarding the shocked gasps from those in line. As she made her way to the front, she failed to notice the hurt in the elderly woman's eyes, a look that would soon linger in her memory. The morning sunlight streamed through the tall windows of the imposing courthouse, casting a harsh light on the reality that Claire was about to face. She was a woman of considerable wealth, yet her heart was gripped by an impoverishing fear. Her estranged husband, a formidable figure in the city's upper echelons, was fighting for full custody of their precious son. The thought alone was enough to make her heart squeeze painfully in her chest. As soon as she entered the courtroom, she saw her son, a little figure sitting far away, his innocent eyes catching hers. His hesitation and confusion matched her own anxieties. Her heart hurt at the thought of him being so far away from her, and a knot formed in her throat as she forced a comforting smile onto her perfectly groomed face. Her husband was talking to his lawyer when he turned to face her, the love that once shone in his eyes now gone. A mix of anger, betrayal, and dread surged within her. "You won't get away with this, Richard," she whispered, gripping her handbag tightly as she sat down. Her heart nearly stopped when she noticed the judge, none other than the elderly woman she had insulted at the grocery store. Regret washed over her as memories of the woman's hurt face flooded back. Tears blurred her vision as she wished she could apologize, but it was too late. She could only brace for the consequences of her actions, hoping for a miracle. Tension in the courtroom was palpable as the proceedings got underway. With her hands sweaty and firmly clasped in her lap, Claire sat with her pulse racing in her chest. Everything seemed to condense into this one room, this one instant. Every whisper, every rustle of paper appeared magnified, reflecting her growing fear. The lawyers presented their cases, each argument a painful blow to Claire's already fragile state. Her husband's lawyer painted a picture of her as an irresponsible mother, a woman more concerned with her social life than her young son. Claire clenched her teeth, resisting the urge to shout back, to defend her love for her son that no one could possibly understand. Her lawyer rebutted, arguing her dedication as a mother and the bond she had with her son. But with every passing second, Claire felt her hope shrinking, a tiny flame flickering in the face of a raging storm. Throughout the proceedings, Judge Helen sat passively, her face an unreadable mask. Her eyes, however, held a sharp intensity, missing nothing. She asked pointed questions, her voice stern but fair, and though she was the woman Claire had insulted, her conduct was nothing but professional. Judge Helen called for a brief recess before the verdict, and the entire crowd seemed to hold its breath. With her body numb, Claire sat, casting a quick glance at her son, who was bent over in his chair, terror in his eyes. A lump formed in her throat. What if she lost him? The thought was unbearable, a reality too cruel to contemplate. As the courtroom filled up again, Claire felt the weight of the moment pressing down on her. The hushed whispers, the shuffle of feet, everything seemed to blur as Judge Helen took her place at the bench. The elderly woman looked down at her, her gaze devoid of the hurt and surprise from the previous day. She looked every bit the judge, the arbiter of justice, the one who held Claire's fate in her hands. Claire held her breath, her hands clasped together so tightly that her knuckles turned white. The room fell silent, the atmosphere heavy with anticipation. She closed her eyes, her mind filled with the image of her son's face, his laughter, his hugs, his innocent questions. She couldn't lose him. She just couldn't. Judge Helen's voice broke through the deafening silence. Custody of the child is awarded to the mother. The words echoed in the room, a lifeline thrown to Claire in her sea of despair. She opened her eyes, hardly daring to believe what she had just heard. She looked at Judge Helen, her eyes wide with shock and relief. Judge Helen continued, her stern gaze shifting to Claire's husband. "Mr. Sullivan, you are hereby reprimanded for the attempted bribery of the jury, a grave offense that the court will not take lightly." Shock rippled across the room, a gasp audible to everyone. Claire's spouse appeared genuinely disturbed, his self-assured expression disintegrating. Claire felt a wave of relief wash over her like a rain of pure tears. Her body began to slump as the stress from the previous several days quickly left her. She looked at her son, his own eyes filled with tears, his small shoulders shaking with suppressed sobs. Her heart ached at the sight, a painful reminder of what they had both been through. She wished she could rush over and envelop him in a hug, reassure him that it was all over. But for now, all she could do was smile through her tears and softly promise her son that things would get better. She nodded at Judge Helen, her gratitude evident in her gaze. Despite her initial fear, justice had been served, and for that, Claire would be forever grateful. The following day dawned bright and clear, a stark contrast to the storm that had been raging in Claire's life. She waited outside the courthouse, her heart lighter and her step more certain as she looked through the throng for one specific face, the face of the mother who had returned her child. Claire felt a knot in her throat when Judge Helen eventually left the courtroom. She approached her, a mixture of thankfulness and trepidation in her heart. "You're Judge Helen," she said, her voice a little shaky. The old woman looked around, her eyebrows going up in shock. Claire inhaled deeply as she collected her thoughts. "I wanted to express my gratitude. My son, the most valuable possession I have, was returned to me by you." Her voice was choking with emotion as she continued, "I don't know how I can ever repay you." Judge Helen looked at her for a long moment, her gaze unreadable, then nodded. "You're welcome," she said simply, her tone softening slightly as her mind circled back to the grocery store incident. Claire continued, "And I wanted to apologize. What I did at the grocery store was inexcusable. I was wrong, and I'm truly sorry." Judge Helen nodded, her gaze thoughtful. "I appreciate your apology," she said, her voice gentle. "But why did you help me?" Claire asked, her curiosity getting the better of her. "After how I treated you, why?" Judge Helen gave a small, understanding smile. "First," she said seriously, "the law is on your side, and as a judge, I can't let personal feelings affect my decisions." She paused, looking thoughtful. "Second," she continued in a softer voice, "I've been in your shoes. I've had 4 husbands, none of whom were very nice, and I have 5 children that I would do anything for. So I understand you more than you think." Then her expression became serious again. "Let this be a lesson. Your actions have consequences, and you were lucky this time. Life won't always be this easy. You need to change how you treat others. You never know when you might need their help." Claire nodded, tears welling in her eyes again. She recognized that Judge Helen was right. She would remember this important lesson for the rest of her life. With a new sense of determination, she thanked Judge Helen one more time before leaving, knowing that both she and her son deserved better. She would work to be better for them both.